Welcome to a new Traits podcast episode where we are focusing on building higher performing organizations. That is a great lead into our guest here this week. Size isn't always the only way to measure success in business. If you have a large business or a small business, sometimes people have different desires for their business, and there's a sweet spot. Having said that, I interviewed somebody for this specific episode that does have a decent sized business. They grew from 100 to 250 employees in a really short period of time, which is exciting. There are problems when there is growth in business. I have a couple of colleagues that consistently say the cracks become chasms when you're growing really fast in the business. So what we're going to do in this episode, prepare yourself, we're going to focus on strategy and culture when it comes to upping the game, growing a business. One thing I want you to really pay attention to in this episode is that Joel's going to mention managers a number of times. We talk about managers in various ways. Please pay attention to this. Managers are absolutely essential for sustainable growth in a business, and having the right managers in the right place, having managers that can pick up on things that most people might miss is a key. Enjoy this episode and stick around for the end. After the interview, I've got a couple of things that I believe will help you no matter what size your business, if you are interested in growth at all in any way, shape, or form. For this episode of the Traits podcast, I'm excited to speak with Joel Cawthorn. So I'm gonna let you introduce yourself a little bit, Joel. It's been fantastic getting to know you a tiny bit. I'm looking forward to this meeting, getting to know you a little bit more. But how about you introduce yourself, your position with StarTech, and then just talk a little bit about StarTech, what it is, and its growth over the last little while here.
Yeah, all right. Well, thanks, Mark. I'm looking forward to having this conversation today as well. And it has been a pleasure to get to know you also. For myself, so I'm currently a director on the board for the StarTech Group, but just previously I was the president for roughly 15 years or so for one of the, call it, operating divisions. They're technically actually separate companies, but in the StarTech Group, I was running the refrigeration services and contracting entity. So that's kind of my background. And so I've been with I was with the organization operationally for almost 30 years, or maybe even just a touch more. And so I graduated in 91 from engineering, did a little bit of engineering, realized that wasn't really my calling, and kind of migrated around to various different roles, ultimately ending up in a leadership capacity.
Brilliant.
And you want to hear a bit more about StarTech itself?
Just share with listeners what StarTech is, and again, highlight the growth that you've seen over the last little while.
Yeah, so at a very high level, we do engineering, design, and build of large-scale refrigeration systems for that sort of market, being, say, food processing and cold storage, for example. And then the other side is we do the same thing, engineering, design, and fabrication build of process systems for energy and the energy transition space. So probably in the last 10 years, we've seen a fairly remarkable growth trajectory. So we would have been, say, in top line revenue, somewhere around 30 million or thereabouts. And it ebbed and flowed a little bit with some of the, attachment to the oil and gas market. But now we're getting up to somewhere around 250 employees. We should see closer to, 100 million in revenue. So we've seen really substantial growth over the last period. It's been quite exciting in the organization, actually.
Exciting, but this is also something that terrifies organizations. Once they're in the middle of it, going where we're seeing lots of growth, that's a good thing. And what do we do with it? How are we doing it well? How do we prepare ourselves so that we've got a long-term strategic plan that works for us and it isn't going to cripple us or remove us from the picture because we're not doing what we need to do? So maybe talk about during growth, what were some of those fears or what came up that you had to deal with?
I think we ran into some challenges around systems and processes that didn't scale necessarily with the volume that was going through that. So there was a bit of scrambling for that. We kind of outgrew our ERP system, so our enterprise resource planning system. So we embarked on an initiative to replace that, which is still ongoing actually as we speak. And then finding people was also a challenge, right? So when we hit big growth spurts, then staffing for that was actually quite challenging. And so that really we had to kind of top upgrade our game in terms of HR, in terms of how we brought people on, found them and brought them on. So I
Excellent.
would say that kind of, and then of course your working capital concerns, like how do you finance the growth and that sort of thing. So a whole bunch of issues and concerns balled up into a big ball, but it was a lot of learning, and it was, like I said, it was very exciting.
Yeah, and let's maybe stay here for a little bit. You talked about HR and hiring and everything that entailed in this growth process. What helped you in getting the right people for needed positions? What yeah, what was again maybe some of the difficulties you saw, and then how did you solve those?
So I think, well, initially we had to hire someone specifically for the HR role. So prior to that, all the managers and leadership were wearing, multiple hats and doing their own hiring and so on and so forth. So it was inconsistent. We didn't really follow the system. So by bringing on HR expertise, then we could, properly identify the role requirements, translate it into a job description, and the posting, and so on and so on, and the vetting of the resumes and the interviewing process. So we're iterative, could call it approach to that. We kind of top graded that whole element of it. And so that was helpful. But what was interesting to note from my perspective is that as we started to get momentum and growth, then we started to find that when the culture started to align, people internally were referring people that they knew in the industry. In the big world, it's actually a small world in that sense from a business perspective. And once you get a bit of a reputation, then people are actually interested in coming to join your organization. So we found it a little bit easier to bring people on and to find them as things progressed. But just the sheer market forces around, for example, tradespeople. So when things are very, very busy, well, there aren't that many pipe fitters and welders that are, good enough to be joining the team. So that, there's a scramble around that. But that was, I think, our key was realizing how valuable our existing employees were in identifying others that would fit in our organization and then helping them, on board with us.
Okay, so you've mentioned culture and fit a couple of times within the last minute or so here. Why do you think culture is so important specifically for your business? Talk about culture a little bit.
Well, I would say, culture really supports your strategy, right? So if you don't have a culture that is aligned with whatever your strategy is, then you will have problems. And so I kind of say to people, well, if you think about, if you're sitting in a boiler room on the phone, trying to sell penny stocks to some unsuspecting, victim, the culture and the feel of that organization is going to be far, far different than what you would experience walking into an Apple store, right? When they're trying to, make a positive interaction with the brand and that sort of thing. So very, very different. And so I would say that for us, we've noticed as the culture has taken shape and emerged strongly, it becomes a differentiator and a competitive advantage, actually.
And what would your competitive advantage be then? What is, I guess again, culture is used in so many different contexts, but for you, what does culture mean to StarTech? What is the culture that you've designed there or promoted?
Well, I'd say let me talk a bit about the journey. So when I myself took a leadership role, we were coming from kind of what I'll call a ledger-based sort of culture. And there was a lot of it. I've been here forever, so I get to do things differently than that guy. And there wasn't much, call it openness to improvement, change, things of that nature. So recognizing that where we wanted to go with the company didn't align with how a lot of the people felt and thought, there was a problem. And so I would say we didn't, I mean, personally didn't even really realize that that was a cultural issue at the time. It's like, well, they're just not doing what they're supposed to do. And how do I hold people to account and, kind of get into that space. And so by, recognizing that and recognizing the problematic areas and the people, we, started to really build the org chart around what we thought it should look like. And then around about probably 2014, 2015, we brought in an organization that really wanted to identify our secret sauce. So really, they were just supposed to say, what is it that makes this place work? And so they came in and did a fairly in-depth analysis, interviewing lots of the top people, finding out, what it is that was differentiating us. And we came back with call it a company, it's a manifesto, we call it. But it really captures how we roll, essentially. But embedded in that is our core values. And, what is it what we really focus on? It's things like continuous improvement, like dynamic. There's always a better way. And an overall, call it capturing statement for the entire initiative was we came up with the concept Everyday Mavericks. So that's what you'll see now if you go look at our organization online. It's embedded in our social media posting, it's on our website, it's in our internal communications, and it's always referencing back to its manifesto about how we do it. And, don't want overwhelming bureaucracy. We want to be nimble. We want to make the best decisions. We want to be collaborative, right? So all of that sort of stuff that came out of these interviews and has, and was always present was captured that way. So we've been using that as leverage and working that ever since, really, and embedding it. And it's been a long process because it just doesn't happen overnight, but it starts to show up everywhere. Like it's in people's beliefs, it's in their actions. It shows up in the onboarding. It shows up in how meetings are held, company events, all that kind of stuff. So really, that culture comes through in a lot of places.
So top down, deciding on some strategy moving forward, making sure that you understand those positions that you don't need today, but you might need in a year, 2, 5, whatever it is. Who are those people that are going to be those everyday mavericks that fit the role, that fit your culture, and then probably a massive turnover of some of the people that probably weren't a fit or great fit early on, but weren't a fit now.
Yes, that is absolutely what happens. But, the organization and the role and the requirements will often outgrow individuals that are performing at a certain level or different skill sets that they possess that aren't the ones that are required going forward. So you got to be careful about how you handle that. You don't want to, drive those people away or disincentivize them from being in the organization. But on the other hand, you also have those that are culture killers, if you use that terminology, where they clearly don't fit, they don't think the same way, and they cause all kinds of problems. And even if they're the top person in that particular role, you just cannot tolerate that level of poison, I guess, in the organization. Like, it's remarkable to see it kind of flows out and causes all kinds of challenges as a result of that.
Have you become better at it as an organization at identifying people who might not be a fit, and how do you do that, if you do?
Well, typically the manager's going to be identifying that, or when we do reviews, and then you get sort of peer reviews from other managers. So there's a bit of a process in HR that helps with blinders. But if you're just looking at if the culture is a fit and you're trying to find if the person is the right fit for the role, we use a tool that is called traits, a profiling system. So we use this tool quite. I would call it. It's a corporate wide recognized tool that we use for all hiring, but also for performance management and for assessment of potential. So if you're looking at your 4 or 5 year org chart, for example, and you say, okay, we're going to need a division director here, we're going to need a VP for this, and so on and so on. Say, well, who's in the ranks right now that's got potential as an up and comer? So clearly there's ability, initiative, aptitude, desire, all of those things, but also are they wired for that type of role? And then if they are, well, how do you get them on a developmental path to get them to move in that direction? And communicate that too. Like, it's all going to be done in the performance review process to say, listen, we've earmarked you for this potential development. If you're interested, let's talk and let's lay down the roadmap for how that's going to look. So that's let's say how we identify that stuff and how we develop our people internally.
So you just dropped a few different ways you're using this tool right now. And then this is something that I think is really important, because a lot of companies, when they're first introduced to traits or some kind of psychometric assessment, they're thinking this can be used in one way. This is used for strategic planning. This is used for hiring. This is used for whatever. And it can be used in a lot of different ways. What ways do you see it most beneficial for StarTech?
Well, I would just start by saying, like, I've seen all kinds of these types of tools, right? The Myers-Briggs and you name it, because there's a bunch of them out there. This is the first one for me that really I could directly correlate it with a particular person or performance. Like, it was just remarkable. Kind of like the lights went on when I started to get familiar with this tool and start to use it. And for me, where it really came to be particularly helpful at the time was I had hired some managers, some leadership, and on paper, great, interviewed well, references were pretty solid and that sort of thing, but I just wasn't getting the kind of performance that I thought we should be getting. And right around that time, I came across this tool, and so profiling our individuals. In fact, we profiled the entire organization. And then when we looked at those profiles and started to get the interpretations, because we were pretty new to the concepts, saying, well, this person's traits don't really match what that role requires. So there was a mismatch there, which explains, and then we start getting into, what the traits are and how they show up and that sort of thing. It's like, oh, of course, that person's definitely not a manager, right? And so that was where the light bulb first went on. And so when we've gone through now, subsequent to that, when we build a role, and job description, well, there's a trait, like there's a job profile that goes with that. That's based on the trait system itself. So, for example, assertiveness, sociability, pace, detail orientation, those things all show up in different ways in different roles. And so, for example, a high performing salesperson is going to be high in assertiveness, probably pretty high sociability. So if you don't have someone that naturally is that way, then they're not likely to be a really good fit or a strong performer in that type of role. It just won't work for them. Right? It'll be uncomfortable for them doing those types of things that will generally be required to be successful. So I would say, bringing people on and hiring, vetting people for particular roles with a clear idea of what that role requires, that's how we use it now. And so everybody that applies for a role at StarTech is required to do a profiling exercise, and then we compare that against our job profile.
Yeah, that's something that I've used this tool more and more for, is just starting conversations. Somebody wants to move laterally in a company, or somebody wants to move up into a role in 2 to 5 years, and we can just start the conversation of saying, hey, is this true about you? And if they go, yeah, that is true about me, this is the role, is that a fit? Often people will rule themselves in or out of that role and convince themselves that it's a good or not fit, which makes the process easier, rather than just saying, I don't see certain things in you, which can be taken as a slight. This instead goes, hey, these are the things that I do see in you, and this is where I do see the fit. Is that accurate? And people's eyes light up and go, yeah, that's actually what I love doing. Have you seen that a lot?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Absolutely. People have always had this great idea. Well, I get more money, I'll be a manager, and things look great from where I'm sitting right now, but I could be even better if I was doing that job. And then you start walking through. Well, here's the types of things you're going to need to deal with if you take that role, and here's where your natural abilities and traits lie. And they start to say, yeah, I don't really like doing that sort of thing, or that makes me uncomfortable, or I really couldn't see myself doing that 50% of the time. And then they just sort of say, okay, I get it, I totally get it. But what I also find is too, is they appreciate that approach, because like you said, you're not just saying, well, I say that's not happening. Here's why I'm making a decision. And, here's something for your benefit, how we might talk about where you might further develop in a different area or a different role or something like that.
Yeah, I don't think I've told this story to many people. I hate firing people. I do not enjoy that process in any way, shape, or form. Some people are more comfortable because they understand that it releases somebody into something better. I still struggle with it, even if I know somebody's going somewhere better. But with this one individual, it was just this past winter. I had to let this employee go. And I really loved this person. She was fantastic in a lot of ways. She just wasn't a good fit with what we had for her with the role. So we had that conversation. I said, hey, we'll call her Joan. So Joan, listen, this is not a fit for these reasons. Like, does it make sense? And she went, yeah, I see that. And I said, okay, so this is what I do see in you. And I just started talking about, coming from the profile, these are the traits that I do see you're really strong in. And this is where I think you would just do extremely well in another role, and you'll actually do a lot better. You'll be making more money. You'll be enjoying your life more. And again, it was really interesting. I followed up with her a couple weeks later just to see how she was doing, and she had found something right away that did fit her. And she went, Mark, I can see right from the beginning how incredible this is. And it was a confirmation for me that firing, hiring, movement in a business, it doesn't have to be cruel. It doesn't have to be ruthless. We can do things in a way that legitimately help every single individual and the organization involved.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. That's a great story. Yeah, I completely agree. And it's all about that communication, right? About what, the what, and the why. And it certainly is hard at the time. And I agree. I 100% do not enjoy that exercise. But there's, if you look a little further out, generally it's quite positive, right? And people's employment is such a major part of their lives. If they're not doing well in the role that they're in, they're going to feel that. It's going to impact them mentally. And so putting them into a place in a space where they're really performing well and enjoying it and enjoy the culture and fit, wow, it's like dramatic, the improvement and the mental health elements of that come along with it.
It'd be fun to come into your organization for myself and see a snapshot of it, 15 years ago, see a snapshot now, and just see how things move in different ways, see how the systems work together, processes work with each other, so much more efficiency. Okay, so you also mentioned managers and the role that managers play. So maybe expand on that. What role do managers play in really successful growth, specifically for StarTech?
Well, they have to show up as strong leaders, right? So they have to inspire trust. And if you've got a leader that's in place that people really don't resonate with or don't trust, then it just doesn't work. So you've got to have that as a baseline. And your senior team should really have a high level of trust amongst all of them, right? And then once that happens, then you start to see real action happening. I see with our managers or leadership, you have to carry a fair amount of humility with you too. Like, you're not the best, you're not the smartest, you're good at these things, and that's why you're in that job. But really, it's your people, and you are responsible for the productivity and the output of those people doing those jobs. And so, recognize it's not all about you. It's about the people that you're there to develop and support and bring on to achieve whatever your particular goals are. So, if you have a strong group of managers, then you can scale up, I would say, more effectively, because you don't have all these holes showing up in the ship, right? So you don't have leaks springing everywhere from that perspective. And then, finding additional leadership is obviously a challenge, but that's how I've seen that once we found the right people and put them into the right chairs, things just sort of, the whole blinking red light turned off and things went green and off we went, right? So it's dramatic how remarkable it works.
What are the specific traits that you've learned to look for in managers? Because I see a lot of companies promoting to a managerial role people who are simply good at their job, who are maybe can't teach, maybe can't keep accountable, maybe some of those traits. But yeah, what are the traits that you're always looking for?
Well, if you look at it in terms of what the traits profiling system offers up, there's a particular shape. And so once you get really familiar with the system, you recognize the shapes of the graphs and say, well, that person's, going to be a good support person, or that's a good coordinator, or that's a manager. So managers typically have a higher than normal level of assertiveness. So they're okay having difficult conversations with people. They're very results oriented, so they'll be more concerned about the results than necessarily being the person's best friend. It generally helps if they've got a bit higher sociability, because of course there's a lot of communication, and if in that context of that, it means like sociability doesn't mean that they're sitting around the water cooler and gabbing. It's like, well, they're comfortable having lots of interactions with people on a daily basis, right? And then detail orientation a little bit less, and then pace is generally a bit higher because there's a lot of stuff going on as a manager, so you're dealing with a lot of things, a lot of inputs coming at you. So if you look at it from that perspective, they've got higher assertiveness, reasonably high sociability, good pace, and then detail orientation can vary, but generally they're not super detail oriented.
Yeah, and that you talked about the need for higher assertiveness simply because people are needing to fire. They're needing to make difficult decisions. They're needing to keep others accountable rather than simply be their friend.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that I came across early on when I came across this tool was somebody telling me, Mark, this initially, this can be a little bit abrupt for people, but long term, if you have somebody who holds accountable and is still a good person, that ends up creating a team that achieves far more individually and as a team. And they know that. Then they know that it's because of this managerial role that's helping them by keeping them accountable and kind of sometimes holding their feet to the fire, that people long-term appreciate that. Is that something you've seen in StarTech?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say it supports the person in their role because it makes it very clear what the expectations are, for one thing. So you've got that. Then you're checking with them and monitoring progress and giving people a scorecard in a sense too. Like, you are being good at this job, or you're not, or here's where you can improve, that sort of thing. The other thing that I think shows up along the same lines is they all know that everyone else is getting the same treatment. So it's not that Fred down the way there is getting away with murder. I'm here working my butt off. It's more everyone's held to the same standard, and there's an expectation for accountability, and that's also really important.
Right. So if you had the high sociability person that just wants to connect and be friends with everyone, and they're a little bit lower on assertiveness, not as goal oriented, not as focused on that end state, you're going to get lots of water cooler talk and great friendships, but not as much gets done.
Yeah, precisely. Like, their interest in getting the results is much lower than their interest in being friends.
Yeah, no, that makes so much sense to me. And it's been fun seeing that, again, with more companies as I work with various companies doing this. Okay, is there anything that you would kind of leave companies with in the process of growth? Again, remind me, how many employees were there when you started this really strong growth process at StarTech?
We would have had probably, maybe around 100, I would say.
Okay, so 100 to 450.
No, 250 we're at now.
Or sorry, 100 to 250. That's strong growth in a company. what advice would you give to directors, to presidents, to people who are heading this and moving in that direction of things to be careful with, as well as things to kind of double down on as they are going through the process themselves?
That's a big question. Um, Look, overall, I think you need to have systems and processes in place that you can scale. So if you focus on that earlier on and recognizing that there's going to be an expectation for those things to need to scale, that's going to be helpful. Because trying to catch up afterwards is pretty chaotic. And you waste a lot of cycles just trying to fix things and deal with all of that. I think you should probably have, like, assuming that there's a strategic plan. So obviously you've got a 5-year outlook, you're doing whatever your version of strategic planning might be, the Rockefeller or you name it, but you need to have strategic planning in place so you can at least be looking forward, and that will help you, make the personnel decisions, and all of your general operating decisions will be driven by what the vision is for your organization. What we did is, I would say, we kind of learned it on the fly, but recognizing too the value of culture. Like, a lot of people don't even really think about it, but the reality is the culture is extremely important, and it does have to tie to strategy, like I had mentioned. I would say that one of the things too that we're faced with as we speak here, continuing to grow, is that the scarcity is going to be around people in the future. Right? If you look at the demographics, we've got a great number of people leaving the workforce annually now, with not very many coming in behind that. So it'll be a competition for top talent. It already is, but it's going to get worse. So anything you can do to make yourself more attractive to potential employees, the better. And I think that's going to be a big focus. And so that's one of the reasons why we're continually refocusing and focusing on culture in our organization, because we want to make sure we're at the top of the list when it comes time to go find people.
Yeah, it's a brilliant way of looking at it, because so many people, this is coming back to strategic planning, so many companies we're seeing in the consulting world simply are they're always playing catch up. They're always working hard for revenue. They're working hard for growth on some level, and then they're constantly, like you called it, cycling to catch up and figure things out along the way. You're saying, again, come up with that strategic plan first. When that is in place, everything else becomes easier. You're filling in gaps now, but you're prepared for it. You know what's coming, and you can deal with it as it comes, which creates much more efficiency in the process, right?
100%. I would say the other thing that really impacted our performance and our growth was that initially that strategic planning exercise, right? So you lay down the groundwork and the framework and the roadmap, but then what you need to develop after you've done that, because a lot of people will, and we do this ourselves, great strategic plan, that's great, put it on the wall, and then next year you look at it and say, that was a really good plan. But we didn't do anything. So you got to develop the muscle memory to make sure you get some cadence and discipline around affecting that plan, right? So you've got, in our case, quarterly priorities, right? And inside of that, there's a handful that are achievable in a 3-month period, and 3 months go by pretty quickly. But in light of what your annual plan looks like, you start to say, okay, and then you have meetings to follow up on that, and you start to get some trust with the team. And if they're struggling getting something done, there's all kinds of reasons why. Too busy, this happened, that happened, sometimes priority leave, whatever. But once you build up the plan and you get some discipline on executing it, things really start to move then.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Again, so on one hand, you need the strategic plan. On the other hand, you actually need to look at it every once in a while. You need to implement it. It doesn't do anything sitting on the shelf, right?
It's harder than it sounds.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Okay, before we go here, I want to make sure that people know how to contact StarTech, or how to, if they're in need of any refrigeration systems or engineering, that they know how to find you, or anything else. Where would they find you? What are the best ways to follow StarTech as a potential employee, as somebody who's going to be using your services as a client? What's the best way to start that process?
I think you could just directly go to our website. So it's www.startech.ca, and that will give you an idea. And there's some contact information and the like, and more detail about what it is we actually do if you go in and look at some of the project profiles. But also we are on LinkedIn, so you'll find StarTech Compression and Process and StarTech Service. It's kind of a dual name. Find us there, follow us, that would be great. Should be fairly easy and straightforward to get hold of us. We're based out of Calgary, but we've got staffing all throughout Alberta.
And we will.
One other thing I did mention, once we do build those systems, then we support them for the entire life cycle of those projects with field staff. So we've got a fleet of service vehicles that run around, and technical support and engineering and such for things as the project plays out.
Brilliant. Good. What we'll do is we'll include those links in the show notes so people can click on those and be brought to those links really easily and well. Joel, thank you for this. Your time is precious. It was a little bit, we had to figure the scheduling out a little bit, but I appreciate you making the effort with this. Thank you for your time with this.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's been very enjoyable, and it's always when you're talking about something you're quite passionate about, it's always much more fun. And I really appreciated your time as well. It was great.
Thanks, Joel.
Okay, all right, take care.
I hope you enjoyed that episode as much as I did the interview. The biggest benefit that I'm hearing is that an objective assessment can help with giving a perspective. It helps with communication rather than having somebody take offense. Something Joel mentioned in the interview were the various traits a manager needs. Now, this is a really important part of getting the mix right. Something that I really appreciate about the traits tool myself is that instead of saying, as I mentioned in an earlier podcast episode, instead of saying it's hot outside or it's cold outside today, you can say it's 25 degrees or 35 degrees. And as soon as you get a scale, instead of saying something is on off, 1, 0, binary, as soon as you get some more diversity and scale in this process, you can really tweak what is the exact right person for the right role. And there can be two, today we were talking about managers, but there can be two different managers in two different companies, and they need a different bit of scaling with their sociability, for example, or their assertiveness, for example. Those things are really important. This is what I want to do for you. I'm going to be including a couple of links at the bottom of the show notes. So make sure that you go to the bottom of the show notes and you can learn more about traits and what it is, how it works. You can learn more about strat planning. Strat planning is something that Joel mentioned and is actually such an incredibly important part of the process of growth. It's also a really important part of getting your company where it needs to be, even if it doesn't require growth. Looking ahead of things, thinking about the important stuff in a business rather than just the urgent stuff is what business owners and directors get paid to do. This is a vital part of the process. So I'm going to include a couple of links. Last, before I leave you, please subscribe and rate us if you are using Apple Podcasts. If you are using other type of podcast software, please rate us. Like us if this is something that you appreciate. I am really excited about a few more guests that we've been recording in the last couple of days here that we are going to be presenting in the next few weeks. As you may have noticed, some of the first episodes had some sound quality issues. Now, we have fixed this. I've got one more episode that was already recorded with a really good guest again, where there will be less than perfect audio. And I apologize for that. We want to provide a really high quality podcast to you. But again, that'll be fixed. All future episodes after the next one should have really high quality, and we are excited to provide that to you as well. Enjoy your day.